everybody. We're recording on January 12th, 2019, and it's episode 173 of At Percussion. With me, as usual, I've got Megan Arns.
Hello.
And Karli Vigna.
Hi, everyone.
Ben Charles is also here, but we're having a little technical issue at the moment, so I'm sure he'll pop right back in. So, this episode is going to be released probably sometime in either early March or late February, but we're recording just after New Year's, so Happy New Year's, everybody. Does anybody have any interesting musical New Year's resolutions?
Ooh.
I know, I should have given you a heads up on that one. Tony, anything interesting?
And just to have as much fun as I can with music and record as much as I can and, just explore what the new things that are going on.
One of mine is I don't know. I didn't make any New Year's resolutions this year, actually. And I think it's because I've just been trying to set goals and things throughout the year more, and really take concrete steps to make them happen. But a recent musical one, I think, was, trying to have more control over the music that I'm playing rather than everyone, you get asked to play music a lot, right? And I have a tendency to say yes a lot. And if I say yes to too many pieces, then I can't, whether I like them or not, I'm not in complete control of what about the music that I want to play? I have realized I need to keep space for that. So I think I've just been trying around the new year to do a better job of really thinking about each project I'm taking on and saying, do I really believe in this artistically? And do I really want to think about the amount of hours it's going to take to learn each piece I'm taking on and decide if that's something I want to do.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Karli, anything specific come to mind?
Nothing specific, but I've been thinking about similar things to Megan, to keep space for my own projects and don't let everything else that's going on take over. But yeah, I kind of skipped New Year's resolutions this year also. Just rolled right through it.
Yeah.
Well, before we introduce Tony, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I thought I would just say real quick that it's the first episode we're recording of the new year. Just let you know that most common New Year's resolutions, I guess, are weight loss and getting more exercise, quitting smoking, and using less screen time, as well as saving money. And only 10% of New Year's resolutions keep past a few months. So actually, I guess if this is coming out around early March, then this will be right about when 90% of everyone is quitting their New Year's resolutions. And some tips. Yeah, right. So some tips to keeping them going. This comes from behavioral psychologist Dr. Susan Weinschenk. She says take small concrete actions and that our habits are what she calls automatically conditioned responses. So you have to start very, very small. And instead of saying, my goal is to lose weight, you want to make a more focused, simple goal like I'm going to walk 20 minutes every day. That's a much focused goal. Another one is to use visual and or auditory cues. So if you're trying to walk more and go with that 20-minute walk, you are going to make sure to set your shoes out so you see them. And actually, this reminds me of a story I've told before. The horn player from the Boston Brass, when they were visiting JMU, he said one of the greatest lessons his band director told him when he was a kid to help him practice was to, instead of putting your horn down on the floor, just set your horn on your bed and open the case so that the horn is right there staring at you and you have this visual cue to do a little practicing. And, you do a little bit this day and a little more the next day. And before long, it becomes one of these automatic conditioned responses. And then it becomes a habit. Two more. Decide what you want, not what you don't want. So apparently it's easier for our brain networks to work on an intention stated in the affirmative rather than the negative. For example, I'm not going to check my email 10 times a day versus what you are going to do, such as I'm going to start using batch email checking twice a day. So don't say I'm not going to do this, say this is what I will do. And then the last one she says is try to write a new self story. So this is kind of your self-image, and this is how you think the world perceives you and how you perceive yourself. And a lot of times we think of ourselves in a very specific way, and then we mold behaviors to that way we see ourselves because we think that's how we're supposed to be. So yeah, just some quick ideas to hopefully keep your New Year's resolutions going. I didn't make any, but yeah, just an idea.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Casey.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. Well, you guys, it's great to have Tony Artimisi with us. He is an associate professor of music at Winston Salem University. He teaches recording and music business and is the chair of the Liberal Studies Department. And I got to know him on Facebook just when he gave me some just much appreciated and really wonderful music tech advice. So, Tony Artimisi, how's it going?
I'm doing well. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we hear you good. How was your winter break?
Relaxing. I was actually talking to a colleague about that yesterday. I unplugged more over this winter break than I ever have. It was fabulous.
What do you think are the benefits of unplugging?
I needed the rest. It was a really hectic fall semester. We have a lot of new things going on campus, and for me, it was just a great way to just spend time with family and just get that fire kindled again to start the spring really strong.
Yeah. Well, I usually do our What's the Sound later in the episode, but because this one has so much to do with Tony, I thought I would do it real quick, and then we could get talking to Tony about something he is a specialist in. Okay, so that is just a little bit. I rarely do any type of sharing my own projects on the show, but I got asked to write a soundscape for one of my colleagues' art shows coming up in the little neighboring city, Stanton here. And I composed this little soundscape for the installation, and we're both really, really excited about it. And I was asking questions about sound interfaces online, and Tony jumped in and saved the day for me, and he recommended this audio interface that has just done so many great wonders for me. So I'm like slowly getting a little better at recording and a little bit better with technology. And yeah, this interface Tony recommended just changed everything for this recording, and I've never been so happy with the sounds I got out of my microphones, and I've been using my gear as it was for a long time, but it's just so much better now. So Tony, thank you. And can you just tell us a little about like what is an interface and why does it matter? And I don't know, or anywhere you want to take that would be fine. I'm sure you talk about this stuff way more than you probably want to.
Oh no, it's always a pleasure to talk about this stuff. I mean, a little bit about, I guess, my background on teaching.
Yeah, please.
I was a professional drummer for years, in Nashville, Tennessee, and I fell in love with teaching and very deliberately made the move. So, talking about this stuff is something that just kind of always charges me up, So to your question of an audio interface and what that is, it's really, most of them that you see are going to be kind of combo boxes, when you think about the recording chain, of course, the start of every recording chain is a source, and just something making some sound that you put a microphone in front of.
Right.
And then as it travels to it, then the next thing that has to happen is you've got to have a microphone preamplifier that increases the energy coming from a microphone, And then, to get inside of a computer, there has to be something that, converts that to ones and zeros that your computer can deal with,
Right.
So, and that comes in the form of an analog to digital converters. So most audio interfaces are going to be just a combination of preamps and converters going both directions to the computer and from the computer. And, you can buy those things separately, but the interface, allows you to have that in like a convenient box.
Gotcha. Yeah. And why is it that this audio interface does so much better and these preamps do so much better than others?
Well, I imagine you spent a bit more on this one than you did your last one, right?
I did. You are correct.
So,
Yeah, that's right. So yeah.
one.
So I encourage my students to buy, like my student Adam recently bought a SM57 and a very cheap sound interface, because I don't know how much he's going to get into recording. I don't know how far he's going to take it, but I don't know if you all agree with this or not, but I think it's important. Like, well, you should like be able to start playing around with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you probably shouldn't invest $1,000 in equipment that you don't know how to use and maybe aren't interested in using, but it's good to have some, like your first drum set is a cheap one. The first drum set your parents buy you is that CB drum set,
Yeah, mine was my first drum set was a Percussion Plus,
Is that better than CB?
Is it?
I don't know.
It's probably from the
I
same
think they're on the same plane.
Oh, are they? Okay.
I don't know. I had a Pearl Export. I don't know. I was
Same.
pretty cool.
I had a Pearl Export, a red one.
Me too.
Tom a rock star here.
My second drum set was a Pearl Export.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are better kits than I started with, it sounds like. But let me ask you another question then. When we're looking at, say, information that's available to us, you're trying to choose what microphone to buy, and you've got dynamic microphones, ribbon microphones, condenser microphones, and they also show you things like polarity patterns and frequency responses. How would you recommend someone who doesn't know much about this interpret that information and figure out what they need or what they're going to be using it for? And let's say this person is one of our percussion students and they're going to be making, I don't know, audition tapes or summer festival tapes. There's so much information out there and it's so hard to know what it all means. Do you have any recommendations on how to interpret all that?
Yes. And it's like learning another instrument, I was fortunate enough, and when I was in Nashville, and I was recording a lot, and I tell you guys, Nashville really is like the land of milk and honey, when it comes to just outstanding people at what they do, at their craft. So, I was really immersed and around a lot of really great recording engineers. And so I would, and the other benefit of being a professional drummer, the way most modern recording sessions work is, everybody builds their parts off a finished drum track,
Right.
There's a lot of downtime, on some of these sessions when you're working on stuff where people are layering guitar parts and, doing different things like that. So, walking into the control room and staring over some Grammy-winning engineer's shoulders as he's working, there's a lot of ways to gather a lot of information real quick,
Right.
There were a lot of days where you got to be very careful about when you interrupt somebody working. But every once in a while, I'd see something and kind of lean down and kind of ask what that was or what just happened, and they say something that was way over my head. And then that night, I'd get on Google and try to figure out what he meant,
Mm-hmm.
And that happened for me. That was a lot, But for advice for the person who's buying their first gear, the funny thing for me, and I always kind of go back to this, is if you think about those recordings that we love so much from like the 50s, and even the early 60s, every recording engineer that was working at that time would be absolutely jealous of everything that we have right now, that is so convenient to work in such a way. They would be blown away by that. So, you mentioned the SM57. That is an incredible microphone, and you can get a ton of great work done with that. And uh, when you talk about what did you say, the polar patterns on a microphone?
Yeah, polarity patterns.
Yeah, is everybody familiar with that terminology on the call?
Yeah, but maybe it would be helpful to give us like a brief review for the listeners too.
Yeah,
Sure.
please.
Yeah. So every microphone has a polar pattern that kind of that describes its directionality. And that you can set that to be on axis or off axis. And when you're on axis, you're in sort of its sweet spot. Um, So, obviously you want a microphone that's got a good directionality, and for a polar pattern, that'd be a cardioid pattern. That particular pattern is shaped like a heart, and you're going to see that usually printed on the microphone in some place. If you ever see like a heart pattern on your mic, that's the cardioid. And, in exercise terms, we do cardio, and that's good for your heart. And so that's kind of how that cardioid, terminology, is kind of there. For that's sort of the fat part of that, and the way that it kind of comes in, the back part of the microphone is its area of rejection. It's a null point, and especially if you're working in an environment that isn't ideal, a cardioid pattern is really great to pick up what you want to pick up in its direction and sort of reject anything that's behind it. And everybody doesn't have an awesome acoustic environment to work in. We all know cardioid is probably the most common pattern you're going to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes down to like buying the next step in your recording chain, the audio interface, what you're going to get inside of that, say you spend $100 on one of those, you start kind of breaking down what you're getting per channel. Every microphone plugs into a preamp, and that's considered a channel. Right? And if you've got a 2-channel interface, you can hook up 2 microphones or 2, inputs. Same with 4 and 8, 16 or whatever. So, if you think about like sort of the cost per channel, if you spend $100 and get an 8-channel interface, that means you got 8 converters inside of there, and 8 mic preamps. The cost per channel, in the ratio there is pretty low. So it stands to reason the quality is going to be low per channel, right?
Right.
And you bought a Steinberg, like a 4-channel interface, right?
Right.
And so you have, what, $800? Is that somewhere in the ballpark of what that costs?
I think 700, but yeah.
Yeah. So if you should break that down by channel, you're spending over $100 per channel there. Whereas, you start kind of getting cheaper and cheaper down the line, you can see how the quality is going to diminish just on basis of manufacturing cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, that's one way to kind of look at things. In my experience, you can get some very usable results with some pretty cheap gear. Like I mentioned earlier, the people from 50 years ago would be very jealous of what we have to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't tend to hear. We in my recording classes, we do a lot of A/B, especially at the beginning of the semester, of like our really nice gear in the studio here, and even some of our audio interfaces that are kind of laying around. And you would be kind of surprised that if you listen to like 1 channel of a cheap interface next to like 1 channel of a really nice recording chain, there's not a ton of difference.
Yeah.
But start stacking them on top of each other, and you get 8 channels of cheap versus 8 channels of really nice. That's when I start really hearing the differences.
Well, and that's really where I heard it in this little example I played for you all. Just some of the sounds. It wasn't so much like, oh, this is more realistic to what it really sounds like. That wasn't really different, but the layers were just more even, and there was just this clarity, and these, like, I had little paper crumbles recorded really closely at really right at the very close to the microphones, and all that just came to the forefront so cleanly, and I felt like they could record with the volumes lower, like they appeared lower, but also there was more presence than I'd seen before. So yeah, it's just exactly what you said turned out to be very true, because before Laurel and I would use this little 8-channel Zoom recorder, which is great because it's like all in one. You don't need a laptop. It can record it right there on an SD card. And like, it's pretty good. We were really, really happy. And I thought, this is fine. This will keep working forever for my own personal projects. And it probably would. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like more money for less channels, but they really sound so good. Like, they really sound so good. And years ago, our friend John Parks, I was talking to him about a new microphone I just purchased, which is the AKG 414, one of those, the gold microphone, the gold vocal microphone. And he said, oh yeah, that's a great microphone, but you're never going to get what it can really do out of your Zoom. And so, yeah, I don't know, years later, that all proved to be true.
Interesting.
And it's preamp.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you hadn't spent so much time with it, though, you know, and like really, you know, manipulating all the options and experimenting, and that, you know, that now you really, really, really know the difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's little by little, you know, and it's why I like to ask Tony, you know, what's that first step for students? Where should they start? You know, because it's just so overwhelming what is all available out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Megan, I think you have a question for Tony.
Yeah, I was just curious, Tony, about your move from working in Nashville to working at Winston Salem. And this is kind of a two-part question, too, because I also would love to hear you talk about this Emmy nomination. If you are okay with talking about that. Because, you know, in looking you up and seeing all the things that you've done, it appears that you've been nominated for an Emmy Award for your work on the TV show Ruby's Studio, and that the episode is called The Siblings Show. So I'm just curious of the connection of moving between these two sort of different careers, and if you still have a lot of contacts from when you were in Nashville, and if you still get work passed your way from that time, and if you still find yourself kind of doing some of the similar things, even though you're not there in the city anymore.
Yes. So I guess biographically, you know, I moved to Nashville right when I finished my undergrad, and kind of naively, you know, thinking that, you know, I think we all, sort of the arrogance of youth, kind of believe that the world ain't seen nothing yet, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, so when I moved to town, and I even think that when I finished my undergrad, I was probably technically a much better drummer than I am now, but I had very little musical sense, you know, of like ensemble and those things that we consider when performing with a group. I kind of always tell my students I was like a kid on Christmas morning with too many toys. Yeah, so I moved to town, and I immediately sort of heard from some different players around town that I probably needed to check out some more players, and Jeff Porcaro specifically. Some people were really recommending that I check him out, and a lot of control. And once I did that and kind of dug into some other things, which I'd be very happy to talk about, I started getting some artist work, and I toured for several years. And I really, you know, growing up, I had a particular image in my head of what, you know, playing in arenas and stadiums would be like. And then I actually had an opportunity to do that. And I don't know, maybe I had a bad expectation, but you always kind of think, I guess, from MTV and other things, that everybody's living this amazing life, and they're, you know, they have no wants and desires and needs because their life is just awesome. And it just wasn't that way. You know, I remember the first tour I did internationally, we were in Europe, and that was my first time playing to crowds larger than like 20,000 a night. I remember thinking, wow, that was really amazing. And they treated us like rock stars over there. And then I got back to Nashville, and it was like, you know, getting back to my little apartment, trying to pay the bills and stuff. And I was like, wow, my life has not significantly changed. I still have the same problems I had before I left, you know.
Sure.
And then I'm kind of an introverted person, and, you know, doing these meet and greets and stuff like that, and having to act like I was kind of larger than life, and after concerts and stuff like that, when as an introvert, I would kind of rather mind my own business and kind of, kind of be quiet and recharge and do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was very, very difficult for me to do that. And I quickly fell out of love with touring. So I made a very dedicated and intentional shift to recording. And so I put all my eggs in that basket, worked very hard to establish a recording career in Nashville. And I could probably say with a straight face that I was a session drummer for like 2 years. That is not a lie. I was doing about, 4 or 5 sessions a week, and there's a certain terminology that goes with that. And, I was paying all the bills doing that. And I was also teaching as an adjunct at Tennessee State University. But think about, for me, this is what really hit me about the recording process and doing like albums and stuff like that. Think about like the records you're listening to in the last 10 to 15 years, right? We love the songs that we hear on the radio, right? We love the songs that are coming out, but every album has 10 to 12 songs on it. And so you work really hard to get 2 good songs done. And then you fill the rest of the record up with like 8 more,
Okay.
8 to 10 more. And there's quite honestly very little effort that goes into those 8 to 10 other songs, right? And so when you consider, that's a pretty bad batting average,
I did not know this. You're saying like, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, so this is great. Yeah, don't hesitate to elaborate, please.
Sure. So you work like really hard, for those 2 songs, and then you work, the other 8, you might have a really great idea for it. You're like, let me try this. And the response is, because of the recording budget, because of the timeline, this is going to sit on the shelf. Nobody's ever going to hear this. Just play it through and move on. And it's
so you're more concerned about the singles and the ones that are going to have radio play?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, those are the ones that are going to pay the bills and fund the next record, and the other who might not recoup. Yeah. So yeah, I found that pretty unrewarding.
So like, why are we even making CDs, right?
That's a very good question. But Weird Al Yankovic asked that question. Do you remember that 4 years ago? Remember Weird Al did that?
I don't remember Weird Al, but
I've
certainly heard it asked.
Yeah, so Weird Al, he's a parody artist. We all know him, but he released a single minus a record a couple years ago, under this assumption of why we need records, and he found out that like his single that he released did not perform that well because the psychology of having an event, of dropping this sort of package, and then having singles based off of that seems to be in our public consciousness of a need, even though we're not really listening to 3/4 of it, really, or more.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a really interesting sort of psychology to the process.
Well, and I understand that's definitely like a mainstream thing. They go for the big hit, the big single, but it's amazing some of the, more off the radar bands that I'm sure a lot of us listen to. You'll find the same thing, but yet it's so great when the opposite happens. Like the whole album is just fantastic,
Yeah.
You can see a lot of that with bands, though, and I wasn't in a band. I was a sideman, right? So my voice and my and again, if I was somebody like a Josh Freese, or a Vinnie Colaiuta, they've got a different sort of credibility that they bring to recording sessions. I was new, so there's a certain amount of, proving myself that has to happen before you can really speak your voice like that, and say, this is not right. I don't agree with your direction on this. People who have that sort of high top of the pile credibility can make those, very strong opinions, and everybody can't do that when they're new, And so I remember kind of the day that my recording career and my time in Nashville ended. It wasn't like the day I made the decision to move. Like I made the decision that it was done. I was going to to a recording session, and I kind of locked the door and I kind of sighed like, okay, another day of this. And that's when I stopped in my tracks, like, whoa, why would I think that? You know, like
Yeah.
that was the thing I was building towards my whole life, was to be a session drummer. Since I discovered that was a thing, that's what I wanted to do. And I was like, wow, I'm unhappy. And I looked at my calendar book that I was keeping, and I was like, booked a month in advance or so. And I was like, I don't want to do any of this.
Wow.
And at the same time, I was very much in love with Tennessee State University. And I was really being rewarded by that and pouring into other people. And that's
Teaching.
another psychological thing that I'm sure you guys can relate to is, you know, as a professional drummer, you've got to be a cheerleader for yourself. You know,
Yeah.
you've got to be very much about, did you hear this thing that I just did? Did you check out, you know, whatever. It's about you, as opposed to being a teacher where you pour into other people's lives and you're a cheerleader for them. And that to me is a much more rewarding philosophy, you know?
Yeah.
And so when you see light bulbs go off in other people's heads and, you know, you see them achieve their goals, I really appreciate that a lot more than just talking about myself, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But it
so
seems like now you sort of have a mix of both too, right?
I have this wonderful luxury of still having many of my connections with Nashville. And I've kind of branched out. I've got some people in Los Angeles I work with. That's the Ruby Studio stuff. And just kind of around the country who send me things, and I trust them. I like them. I like the work that they do. So I can kind of pick and choose the stuff that I want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and still have that sort of daily reward of teaching and stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So the Ruby Studio thing, to answer your question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a buddy of mine in Chicago named Chris Motor. He's a film composer and does a lot of television commercials.
Okay.
And he's got a band called the Great Crusades. They're very good. You should check them out. Indie
Okay.
band.
Cool.
He's also a drummer. I think he got his film scoring degree or composition from Cal Arts. He went to Berkeley for his undergrad.
Okay.
He called me up, and this is something that I would probably hope to touch on later. I really like to talk about the drum set as sort of. I'll get back to it. Tangent. So Chris called me up and asked me if I did any marching percussion. And yeah, we have degrees in music. You guys understand performance degrees. You guys know how that is.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that, and I was also writing for the drum line at Tennessee State. So I published some marching things through Roll Off Percussion. And I said, yeah, and he said, well, we've got this direct to DVD children's show in Los Angeles. Wants to do some kind of marching thing, but we don't have a song yet. So what Chris asked me to do was write an A phrase and a B phrase of marching cadence with drum set at 90 beats per minute, 100 beats per minute, and 110 beats per minute, and then with some drum line fills as well. And so I think I did like four measure breaks. Like each of them was like 8 measures long, something like that. A and B for each tempo was plus the fills. I just composed it all out. They were all kind of different, and I sent it off. I literally had nothing to listen to.
Huh.
And so I sent that off, and Chris wrote me back and said they're probably going to use the 100 beats per minute one.
Uh-huh.
And about 6 weeks later, he sent me the clip of it, and it sounded real good. But I never actually performed that.
Uh-huh.
They copied and pasted and arranged everything around my drumline cadences that I sent off to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then and so they liked it. They checked it and bounced. You guys know how that goes. And so we kind of forgot about it, So after that, I think Chris and I did a movie for CBS Studios called Get a Job that had Miles Teller in it and Anna Kendrick. And that came out, and we were really excited about the movie, and it didn't end up doing anything, And so it's kind of funny how these things work. Like, we completely forgot about this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then he sent me this message and said that it got picked up by PBS, like in Texas or something. and then it went nationwide, and then it went international, and then it hit Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, and we were like, that?
What? That one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like a year later, he wrote me and said, hey, we were nominated for an Emmy for that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was, so I mean, at first it just kind of started out as this like small direct-to-DVD thing that we just kind of forgot about, so it completely outperformed itself.
And so as someone who like doesn't really know much about licensing and stuff, what did you have any monetary profit from that, or was it just you sold the tracks originally?
Well, I didn't know, because I was contracted for that, and that's like a word for. So,
right. So you got money from that
like
contract, and that's it, right?
Yeah. No, I'm sure Chris got some from that because he was a composer. But as me as a contracted percussionist, that's kind of where my relationship ends.
Yeah.
Hey, well, speaking of how this has changed, things changed for drummers as in recording. Have you happened to heard of a documentary called The Click, a documentary about where the drums went and why music sounds the same?
I haven't heard about that, no.
I hadn't heard of it, and I haven't watched it yet either, but it was something that they sent to us, the technology committee, PAS technology committee, Brady Harrison, who we got to have on the show. I've been saying that for a long time, but Brady sent me this saying, hey, this might be a cool thing to talk about on the panel discussion. And I just watched the trailer and read the summary, but they're talking about a lot of very well-known famous drummers talking about how, well, it doesn't matter what you play, even if you play something that felt really, really right, the sound engineer is going to move your snare drum right to the perfect spot in the grid, and they're just going to turn you into a drum machine. Like, if they're not using drum machines already, they're going to take what you played and rearrange it so it ends up sounding like a drum machine. And I don't know, there's a lot of people speaking about that same, like, getting disenchanted with recording, like you were saying a few minutes ago. So anyway, that's something that, I don't know, we could all check out sometime. It's called The Click.
Something that I feel very strongly about, sort of philosophically, and I hope I don't miss my point on this, is that this idea of, if you think back to this 50s, 60s, and I guess, previous century, you had these sort of geographic regions, this sort of Los Angeles drummer sound, this New York drummer sound, Muscle Shoals, Chicago. You had different types of blues, even you could listen to a recording and even know where it came from geographically, just but based on its feel, and to a degree, and these days that's impossible. There's really no Los Angeles sound versus New York sound, and I think, Casey, it might be for that very reason, is everything's so quantized. You don't really know where the beat sits anymore naturally. You kind of lost that.
Yeah. Well, I'm also amazed, I'll go to I haven't been to a show in a really long time, but I'll go to a show of a band I really like, and I think, oh yeah, the drummer is really killer. I listen to the record, and I think that is a good drummer. And then you see them live, and like their technique is like horrible. But it's like, it's just funny. It's like all the nuance we were taught, like you can wash that away, and you compress everything and make everything the same volume, and you can like really change everything. But we should move on. I think we're definitely going to ask Tony about drum set pedagogy, because he's got some really cool ideas about that, and I think some really innovative ideas. But first, real quick, Karli, I think you said you had something.
Sure, yeah. I wanted to open a discussion between all of us on music business and music technology and music engineering degrees. That is something, like, when I was applying for undergrad 15 years ago, it wasn't on my radar. I didn't know it existed, and I think it probably did, but just not to the degree that it does now. It's getting more and more popular, especially I see here in South Florida a lot of high school students that are interested in it. So one thing I've been thinking about too with some of my students at FIU is what's the role of applied lessons and ensemble playing for these students that are majoring in music technology, that are studying recording engineering, or studying music business. So I'll start off. For me, I think that all the percussion students, especially classical concert percussion students, need to have like the technical facility to be able to express themselves. So they learn kind of the basics of music and expression on the three main concert instrument groups, snare drum, timpani, and keyboard percussion, because I think they need to use like their performance opportunities and their performance, their practice and performances as a vehicle for understanding music, for developing their ears, etc. So my question for Tony and for all of you is, what do you think music business and music technology majors need most to get the most out of their applied lessons and ensembles to apply that knowledge towards their career goals?
Ooh, anybody want to bite
Yeah.
first?
It's a big one.
Well, it's a big one, and I know here we cover a lot of things in our music industry program. Like there's the whole business side. In fact, I sat in on my colleague's class called Legal Aspects, which I thought was really, really way more interesting than I was expecting it to be. And just, God, so much stuff I don't know and don't think about. So it's so broad. I mean, it's like music industry it can mean so many things because there's the technical side, like the recording side, and then there's the business side. And then I know like Laurel's sister has a degree from MTSU in Middle Tennessee State, where our buddy Lalo Davila teaches. And it's some type of music. I forget what it's called, but it's some type of music industry degree, but she did never, it was all the business side. It was all like the marketing and promoting, like she like to be like a manager, so
Okay.
never had to play an instrument, never had to touch a microphone. So man, it's so hard. Like if I think they give me a specific goal, I think I know what to tell them, but it's so broad, That's my two cents.
I
You think that
recently
no
asked.
matter what?
Ooh, did Megan steamroll Ben? That's never happened. Let's go with it. That's good. It's usually Ben driving the steamroller.
I haven't had a me in. Go on, Megan.
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. Go.
No, I was just going to say, I recently asked our music business professor here at Tarleton this very question, and he's very, very kind of well versed in this stuff. He's done a lot of commercial music sort of stuff, and he just said, like, man, you got to know your craft. And I think it's really true, like, especially if you're recording, like, if you're trying to record, a really good musician and you have no idea of what a really good musician has gone through to get to that level, or what a really good musician sounds like how on earth can you record that person? And I think like you can equally loop music ed majors into this also. I mean, that's a totally different sort of thing, but yeah, like if you don't know what good musicianship is and what it takes to get there and what it sounds like and how to identify it, like how on earth can you participate in that industry at all?
Yeah, I mean, Casey, I remember we were having this discussion on a very recent episode about, having more traditional degree programs and having degree programs where students can kind of
I was just
pick their classes a la carte, as reminding me of that conversation,
Yes, me too.
Because I'm just thinking, all of the different sort of mediums that had been mentioned and that Karli laid out, they're so different. And like, there are so many different options even within all of them. And yeah, I mean, I want to say, yeah, of course it's important for people to like have an understanding of what it takes to know how to play an acoustic instrument. But it's also important for them to gain the ensemble skills and communication that you get from playing in an ensemble. But then like how much of it, and how many other classes do they need to fit in? How do you fit all that into a 4-year degree program? I don't know. It's hard.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Tony. Are we close?
Well, I don't know if there's a right answer. I mean, all of this is fantastic. I have a particular opinion. When I think about what makes somebody a great performer, like sort of breaking down those characteristics of musicianship, we have things like that we use to talk about music in multiple ways. You can say things to your students like, make that sound more sad. You can do sort of emotional sort of coaching, but you can also do things in a more quantitative look as well and say, dynamically just be louder there, or adjust your rubatos, and just say, speed up here, slow down here. There's all types of very quantitative ways to look at musical performance, and that you can spell out for students, right? And all of those things happen either implicitly or explicitly. If you say to somebody, play something more sad, you're probably going to start to hear things get quieter. You're probably going to start to hear things slow down a little bit. You're probably going to hear their touch change in some kind of way, right? Based on their opinion of sadness, right? So when you look at like those things that go into somebody's ability to convey those emotions or do those things that you're asking them to do on a particular instrument, to kind of go back to that idea of instrument groups, I generally look at percussion from like a five-pronged perspective. There's a drum set, there's snare drum, there's timpani, there's world percussion, and auxiliary percussion as well, right? And keyboard percussion is a whole host of instruments. Auxiliary is a whole host of instruments. World is a whole host of instruments. But so if I'm teaching to this idea of five main instrument groups, right? Because snare drum also encapsulates like concert snare versus rudimental snare, right? And those are different approaches. If somebody comes to me and says they're interested in an instrument group, maybe somebody wants to be a strong keyboard player, maybe somebody wants to be a strong drum set player, right? I can push that person through my notion of like explicit musical characteristics and motion. And if somebody, say behind a drum set, knows what it means to be a good ensemble player, knows what it means to be able to play soft, play loud, have good rhythm, have good sense of of touch and facility around the instrument, the technical ability, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. So all those things that it takes to be an amazing drummer are going to translate across the percussion spectrum, right? So if you're an outstanding musician, going to one of those other groups, you don't just start over from scratch. I can say now, as a keyboard player, you know what it means. Even though you're new to this, you know what it means to play with an ensemble and have a good understanding of how to lock in with the band, how to speed up and slow down and convey emotion, how to approach the instrument, how to have chops, And so if you think about that, I tend to look at my students and say they need to be awesome in one of those categories and good in all of them. And more than likely, having that one axe that you can really just knock the ball out of the park with, you're probably going to be able to apply those same principles to the rest of the percussion categories. So when it comes to percussion, recording, if you have that deep understanding of what brings a great musical performance, and then it comes time to capture that in some kind of medium, you know where to begin, right? And you're not getting it.
Yeah.
Right? You're not capturing like, boy, this person, and that's for me, Casey, because you and I talked about this in Facebook chat a couple weeks ago, I think. You were asking me about what do I think is the most important thing in the recording chain, and for me, it's the individual, it's the person, right? That's the most expensive piece of gear you're going to bring into a recording.
The player.
Chain. Yeah, like if your player is bad, you're just going to get a great recording of bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Who wants that, right? So there's much more to being a recording engineer than just the technical aspect of it. There's a psychological side too. Like, how do you make that individual comfortable? How do you, so they can do the best thing, get the best performance that people are going to want to listen to. And then, so you begin to, come at it with that approach, that you essentially a microphone is just an ear. Then that sort of changes my approach to recording. We were talking about a recording engineer named Mitch Easter, and he recorded the early REM records, and he did that in the garage, and they sound amazing because he comes at it from that perspective. Wow. He didn't have a set of gear.
I had a follow-up question to this, and it's like, I've never heard it described like that succinctly. Like, no matter how good your recording is, if the musician is bad, you're just going to get a good recording of bad. And I was wondering, has anyone ever heard of, and this is something I've been toying with for a while, for music business, commercial music, whatever the degree is called, students of, instead of doing a jury performance, of doing a recording as like a final project. like a recording of your, snare drum etude or whatever?
I've made my industry students record clapping music by themselves, do both parts,
Cool.
which
Yeah.
was surprisingly easy for them. I thought it would be a little hard. they, they really
Well-
did it well. Two of them really did it like so much faster than I thought they would. Video and all, of one person doing both parts. And I was kind of like, damn it, I thought this would have taken longer, but they did such a good
Well,
job.
I had a friend that went to University of Delaware, and I could be wrong, but I think he said that all percussion juries at Delaware were recorded. There wasn't a live jury, and other instrumentalists would get kind of like piggy about this, and they would bring it up, and they would say, well, that means they can do as many takes as they want, and they can just get a perfect recording. And the professor said, like, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
There is no excuse of I got nervous at that point. Like it's
Yeah.
not any easier to make a perfect recording than to do
Right.
an
Yeah.
even mediocre live performance.
Is that Harvey Price? Is that the percussion
Yeah,
studio
yeah.
that does that?
And like I said, yeah, that's who it is. But like I said, I could be misquoting
See?
something. I think he said all percussion students, but I could be wrong on that.
And then as the
I
professor,
could see the value in
you
doing
could-
that like one semester or something. I don't know.
No, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then when it comes to like making recorded auditions for festivals or grad school,
Right.
like that doesn't seem like a big deal. They've done it.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I think in terms of grading, like, how many times have you been like, zoned out for a jury? Like it makes it easier for the professor to objectively grade.
You could also just choose to not listen to them
Yeah, that too.
and go on break early if you wanted to. That's a really cool idea. Thanks for mentioning
Yeah.
that, Ben, because I love mixing up juries. Like, let's do a mock audition for this
I
jury.
know.
Let's do everyone plays the same rep for this jury. It's fun to really change them around. So no, that's cool. That's another one I should add to the unofficial rotation. But as we're getting towards the end, I wanted to ask Tony, you have talked about with me your thoughts on drum set pedagogy, and you said you had some ideas you might be willing to share today. Can you tell us what you were thinking about, or how you think drum sets should be taught differently?
I do. I wrote my dissertation on a drummer named Jeff Porcaro, who was in a band called Toto, but he was also a real prolific session drummer. He played on around 700 different records, and kind of considering that he passed away so abruptly in 1992, his career only spanned about 15 years, from the mid 70s to early 90s. So, to do 700 recordings in that time frame was pretty impressive. Plus, considering he was in a Grammy-winning band, that was touring as well. He was pulled away a little bit to attend to that. He was working a lot, and so it happened that the chair of my committee for my DMA was a music theorist, and so he asked me, topically what I'd like to do, and I said, well, I'd like to analyze Jeff Porcaro's drumming, and he said, well, what do you mean by analyze? I didn't have an answer for that, what do you mean when you're going to analyze somebody's drumming? That was very that stopped me in my tracks, and there hasn't been a ton of work done on that front. And if you look in a lot of the magazines, and I don't mean to speak poorly about them because I do think there's a lot of value in what they do publish, you'll see somebody say an analysis of this particular song. And what they'll tend to do is they'll take an excerpt from it that might be challenging, and then they'll transcribe it, and then present a methodology on how to practice towards performing that. And that's not necessarily an analysis. It's a good pedagogical tool, but when we think of like our music theory classes, that's completely different than what we do in there. So what I had to go through for my dissertation, and I believe in this fairly strongly. I think this could have some legs. I found an article by a professor from Capital University named Robert Breithaupt. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. I've never met him, but he published an article in the 80s in Percussive Notes on creative ideas for drum set soloing for students. Mm-hmm. And he presented 9 different ideas for drum set soloists, and in that he said, have your students experiment with dynamics, have them experiment with the rate of strokes, which would be like subdivisions, have them experiment with accents, with rests and rhythmic figures, with unisons, with hand to foot distribution, and with special effects. And he had two more that really didn't work for recording, which was like motion, because in an audio recording you can't see somebody and how they're moving around the drum set. And he talked about just randomly using all of those, and we can't really talk about random in a performance as well. But if we look at like drum set performance in a commercial style, those 7 different sort of ideas that he presented, I thought would make a very strong case from having a transferable way to analyze somebody's drumming and create like a catalog for how different people approach something. I'm sure we've all been in drum clinics before and had that horrible question get asked that everybody always raises their hand, somebody, and says, when do you go to your ride cymbal? Right? I mean, gosh, what is the answer to that?
In the B section.
You know, and I saw a real
solo.
famous drummer at PASIC one year. Somebody asked him that, and he was, I'm not going to say what band he was in. I don't want to, you know, throw any stones here, but he said, you know, a lot of times when you go to the chorus, you do the ride cymbal. But he goes, but with the artist I'm working with right now, there's a song where I play the ride cymbal in the verse. So, you know, that's not really an answer, is it? So I looked at all this stuff, and I was this morning as I was kind of thinking about, you know, Casey said to kind of, you want to talk about pedagogy. I went back to Rosanna by Toto, and that song just knocks me over after thinking about what Jeff did with that, you know. There are some things that we can't analyze. We have to be very careful about, I think, when we're looking at like music theory for drum set. We have to be very careful about things like intent. You know, like this person intended for this to happen, you know, when listening to a recording. You know, if we go back to my example about that Ruby Studio thing, if somebody said, well, Tony intended for this to happen, that'd be false because I didn't hear anything, right? They put that together later. So, you know, this sort of idea of I responded to something in some kind of way, you know, in a recording session, especially a modern session, you just can't know what that drummer was hearing when they recorded it to know if they meant anything, you know. That's really challenging. And you know, so I was looking at Rosanna today, and we all know the Rosanna group, right? I'm sitting by my drum set, you know, and everybody says, you know, oh yeah, the Rosanna group, and they play. Right? That's that groove that is so famous, you know. What's amazing is how often that groove doesn't happen in the song, right? So I was looking at like the choruses of this song, right? And Jeff, I consider Jeff Porcaro the Mozart of the drum set. This guy, I mean, the stuff that he did on the surface seemed very simple, but you start scratching the surface of it a little bit, and like, there's just so much going on there. And the cool thing about Jeff is like, he really knew drumming. If you read his interviews, he's one of the few people that I've read that could so artfully and amazingly say, this is what I did and why I did it, which made him a great candidate for this. But if you listen to like his first chorus in Rosanna, he's got a theme for the first chorus, and each of the choruses has a different theme, right? So like if you look at this like in 4-bar phrases, the first chorus has this phrase that goes, right? That's the first 4-bar phrase. If you remember how the chorus goes, he's got, and he's got this long break before this last measure ends, right? The second time that he plays through that 4-bar pattern, he does the exact same thing with just some more ghost notes. But this is neat to me. The third pass through this chorus, and we gotta be, I think if Jeff heard me talking like this, he'd be surprised to hear this too. But the third time he goes to the first chorus, he sets up the second chorus. It's brilliant to me. He changes the pattern like 1 inch. You know, my fingers are close together, and people are going to see a video. But so he plays almost the same thing. Right? He adds like it's just a 12/8 measure. On beat 3, he adds a bass drum. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the first chorus, but it happens everywhere in the second chorus, which is amazing, right? So he goes to the second chorus, and he plays this thing where he adds which didn't happen before. He plays through it again, puts that same note there, and then sends a nod to the first chorus by playing the first chorus on that one again, right? So this is where, to me, the Mozart part kind of happens in the third chorus. And I hope I'm not going too crazy here.
No, that's good.
Yeah. So on the third chorus, this is really neat. The first time through the third chorus, he plays the second chorus. Right? Plays that. Second time through the third chorus, he plays the first chorus. Right? Now this is where it blows my mind. The third time through the chorus, he sets up the last one, which is amazing to me. He changes the melody, right? So he gets to this. Right? So whereas before he played this, I played on the rhythm of my snare drum. Where he played that before, he changes the melody to a snare drum. Right? So he does that 3 times. And then on the last chorus, he just takes it to the next level. Dynamically, he shoves the faders to the top, recording-wise, and he goes to his ride cymbal. Finally, he gets to that last chorus and just... Right? Get to that point. When does Jeff Porcaro go to the ride cymbal? The last chorus. And tended to also on Steve Lukather's guitar solos. If you listen to Jeff Porcaro's recordings, that happened so many times, right? And so my idea here is like, if we're going to start analyzing these drummers and doing real music theory for this, when a student approaches us and says something basic like, when do you go to your ride cymbal? Because that's really a sensitive question. You know, so that's somebody coming to you kind of vulnerably and saying, yeah, I don't want to be wrong, right? There's so many thousands of drummers who are going to do that so many different ways. As teachers, wouldn't it be powerful to go, well, if you're playing like Vinnie Colaiuta, if you're playing like Jeff Porcaro, here's their trends. Here's how they play. If you want to be like Jeff, you're going to go to your ride cymbal in the last chorus and for the guitar solo. If you're going to play like Vinnie Colaiuta tends to go to his ride cymbal very often in choruses, much more so than Jeff ever would have, right? Mm-hmm. So this to me, I think if we digging into this, I think the time is really ripe for where drumming is right now. The drum set is an instrument. About 150 years old, we're getting better about our history, which is something that we need to do. I wrote a book about Nashville drumming history because I was so frustrated how hard it was to find things out about Jeff. I thought, man, we got to start writing this stuff down or we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then where we are as players, because the players right now have such a wonderful facility behind the instrument. They can play. And I think the time is right now to sort of add that third leg to the stool and say, let's get serious about our music theory for the drum set and really elevate the conversation. And so we could say, if you want to talk about playing like a certain player, there are ways that we can do this at a very quantitative level and really teach our students, even if you're not a great drummer yourself, you could say, you know, I can look at our music theory textbook for drum set players and start looking at the Jeff Porcaro crescendo or something as we do.
Yeah.
Like, other ways of looking at music theory. which, music theory historically is an interesting kind of theory in that our concepts follow practice, as opposed to like in engineering, where our theories in engineering lead to building something. If you look at like the way we talked about like fugues and stuff, Bach wrote all those, and then later a theorist came back and made up those rules, right? Bach was just writing. And the same thing can happen for drumming. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got to stop and start at zero. We've got a catalog of 150 years of drummers that we could look at and begin to build these ideas around what drumming is according to certain kinds of players, and how can we teach this in I think, a more constructive manner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so are you going to write that book?
Well,
right.
I've
When
written
do you
200
start
pages
writing?
of one. It's a lot of work, but I think it's valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Well, it seems like you're talking about a really detailed and good way to explain this thing that's really mysterious to a lot of people, which is just style,
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, Jeff Porcaro's style, when he would go to the ride cymbal, when Dave Weckl would go to the ride cymbal, because I'm sure Dave Weckl play that same song, it's going to be done in a totally different, convincing way, but still convincing. And yeah, I find, teaching classical percussion and some drum set here, even talking about how to phrase, like that, it's kind of the equivalent to drum set style, I think. It's like some of my students like, man, technique is great, your playing's great, you're nailing everything, but you just got to go listen to classical music for a year. Like it's just weird to crescendo there, it's weird to diminuendo over there, and yeah, it is this like very, very hard thing to pinpoint all over the place in music. And I think you described it really well in drum set playing. It's like, how do you pinpoint that? How do you teach style specifically?
Yep.
Yeah. So how does this influence, like you're teaching weekly drum set lessons to someone? How is your approach different than what maybe is the typical approach?
Well, I'll tell you how I was taught, and it made for a very embarrassing story. I don't know how we're doing on time.
We have time for an embarrassing story. That's fine.
Oh, great. Do you guys remember the old method books that we used to look at? And you would see something like this. You'd see something like that, and above it would say funk.
Yeah.
There are so many
funk
things that go into like being in a funk band versus a rock band, that just saying that this collection of notes is funk is a bit shallow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up on a method book, sort of curriculum, and before the internet, and in the Midwest, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to hear funk bands, and I met a guy named Ndugu Chancellor when I was like 12 years old, and Ndugu recently passed away.
Yeah.
And he taught at a percussion camp in Illinois at Johnny Lee Lane. I don't know if you know him.
Yep.
And, so in Ndugu, I met him at the camp, and he said, what kind of music do you like? And I said, funk. Now I'm talking to a man, who I was staring at funk, and I didn't know him. But he played on the Michael Jackson stuff. He played with Miles Davis, and second youngest drummer Miles Davis's band, I think, after Tony Williams, and Carlos Santana. I mean, he had quite a resume, even when I met him. And he said, "Wow, you like funk, huh?" And he was really excited to hear that. And he goes, "Who's your favorite funk drummer?" And I said, "Alex Van Halen." And he stared at me and just kept saying, "Alex?" And the reason I said Alex Van Halen is because right that year I met Ndugu, there was a song by Van Halen called "Finish What You Started" that started out going. Well, that was the same pattern from my book. Clearly, that's funk.
Right?
Clearly. Duh. Right? So I thought it was him. I thought, man, how can you not see it? Clearly, he's a funk drummer. He played the that collection of notes, you know? So for me, like in my weekly drum set lessons, you know, I think play along books have come a long way, and I'm very thankful for those. And I think those are very valuable in any drum set curriculum, just so students are playing along with things. Any concept of drum set curriculum that's divorced from listening to music and trying to have students consider ensemble is flawed, you know. But for me, I try to take it one step further than just play-alongs and try to bring in examples of like other drummers playing other things and interpreting things that might be similar, and talking about their trends and their patterns and how they approached similar songs and similar things. So, you know, they're playing with a certain depth of knowledge. Like Casey, like you said, about you just need to listen to some classical music for a while. You know, making sure students are listening to drummers who are doing those things too, so they've got, you know, a bit of a well to draw from.
Wonderful. Well, cool. That's a
So
really great place to end it. You guys, thanks so much. And Tony Artimisi, great to finally chat with you. And Karli, Ben, and Megan, we will catch you all later.
Sounds good. Bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Thanks again, Tony.